How are you all doing? All right? Excellent. So this is a talk about, well, it's about open source and running an open source project. So my name's Simon Bennetts. I work for JIT, where we're building a security orchestration platform, which builds on top of ZAP and other leading edge open source security tools. If you want to learn more about that, our stand's just outside. Now, a good place to start is, how many here has actually heard of ZAP before today? Okay, that's a pretty good number. How many have actually used ZAP? Quite a few as well. That's great. So I suppose it would help if I grab the clicker. So what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to give an introduction to ZAP because it doesn't make much sense if you don't know a bit about the project. Then I'm going to talk about why I created it, because I think it's kind of interesting why open source projects get created, and particularly if you don't intend to, really. And then I'm going to talk about running what's hopefully seen as a successful open source project and what I've seen change in the last 12 years, and a bit of a conclusion as well. So, an introduction to ZAP. So ZAP is a tool for finding vulnerabilities in web applications. And in this case, you may know about certain, like vulnerability scanners, particularly network ones, which work on, by the way, the counter isn't going down, so it looks like I've still got quite a lot of time left. You don't want me to go on all afternoon, trust me. So it looks like, so you may have heard of particular vulnerability scanners which look for known vulnerabilities in known applications. So things like you've got a WordPress plugin, with a known WordPress plugin with a particular vulnerability. We fingerprinted it, you tell it's vulnerable. That's not really what ZAP does. What ZAP does is it actually finds vulnerabilities, unknown vulnerabilities in web applications. And this is great because if you're developing your web application and nobody's actually seen it, there are no known vulnerabilities. But what ZAP will do, it will attack it in a very similar way to a malicious attacker. So it's trying to do all the injection attacks like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, all these kind of things. So ZAP is really acting as the bad guy in this case. And like all OWASP projects, it's completely free and open source. And it's very much a welcoming community-based project. And why that is, hopefully will become apparent over the next few slides. And we've kind of made a bit of a rod for our own backs here. It is ideal for newcomers. When I released it, it was very much aimed at newcomers. We know people who are completely new to security who start off with ZAP. But then we know we've got professional pen testers making a lot of use of some of the more advanced ZAP features. And then we've got companies who are automating ZAP against, attacking thousands of applications every day. So it's a really wide range, which is sometimes challenging to manage. And it's really great for automation. And that's one of the key things and why it's, particularly important for DevOps. If you want to do automated attacks against your applications and you want to do it on a scheduled basis as part of your CI/CD pipeline, then ZAP really is the ideal tool for that. And talking of which, it is, we believe, the world's most frequently used web application scanner. How do we know that? Well, it's kind of difficult to tell, really, because commercial tools don't tend to give you these statistics. But we've kind of looked at, we get certain amount, we can find things out, number of downloads, number of check for update requests made. We don't collect a lot of information, but we try to, we collect everything we can. And based on that, we're pretty sure that ZAP is the most frequently used web application scanner. And I've been saying it at conferences for many years. All our competitors know we say it, and none of them have contradicted me, so it must be true. So, why did I create ZAP? Well, I didn't really mean to. It wasn't the intended outcome. I was a Java developer as a team leader, and I was developing a web application, online application for a UK FTSE 100 company. So one of the top 100 companies in the UK. And I'd had no security training. Anyone here had any security training? Quick show of hands. I was hoping it would be more than that. Okay, right. So things haven't changed that much in the last 12 years then, or 13 years from this point in time. And what I wanted to do was, I knew this was a security critical application, so made sure we got the pen testers in 2 weeks before we go live, because that's obviously a good idea. And it was a kind of a tick in the boxing just to prove we'd done the right things. I still remember talking to the pen testers, explaining everything about the service because I wanted them to have as good a go at it as possible, and putting them in a room, coming back in an hour's time just to make sure they're okay. Did they need any help? Could I explain anything a bit more? And there was one of them logged into the administration console as me. They'd got super user access after 1 hour. Actually, it was worse than that. They'd compromised the whole company's single sign-on system in 1 hour. This was technically out of scope, but we're kind of pleased they did it. And it wasn't really my code, that part, but it still wasn't good. And it kind of set the tone for the whole week. They were there for a week. At the end, it seemed like a complete car crash. I've actually delivered worse pen tests myself now, but at the time it seemed awful. So, the vulnerabilities I'd never even heard of. At the time, I hadn't heard of OWASP either, so it was time, okay, I need to take this stuff seriously. And one thing is that, it was a bad time for me, but thought, pick yourself up, and what are you going to do? Well, what I wanted to do was I wanted to find a open source tool that would allow me to test my applications. I didn't want to be embarrassed by the pen testers again. I also wanted to learn more about web security. I thought, as a developer, I really thought that, I knew how to create products that solved the problem, that performed well, that were usable, that were maintainable, that were performant, but clearly I didn't know how to create secure products. So I wanted to learn more about security just so I could make my own projects more secure. And I've used a lot of open source, and I was kind of interested in getting involved. And I thought, well, this could be a really good opportunity. That's how I learn best, is by getting involved. So let's find an open source web security scanner that I can use. That proved more difficult than I expected. There were no actively maintained projects out there. This was a surprise to me, and it just didn't seem right. I really thought there should be something in this space. There must be a need for it. I certainly had a need, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one. So I started playing around with some abandoned ones. There was an OWASP project called Web Scarab. Has anyone heard of that? The OWASP guys, obviously. I didn't get on with it for some reason. There's another tool called Paris Proxy. Anyone else heard of that? Of course. Only the OWASP guys. Paris Proxy, I quite liked. It was quite simple. It was written in Java, which I knew. Downloaded it, played around with it. Started getting used to it. Started tweaking it a bit. But one thing, OWASP, if you haven't heard of, so Open Web Application Security Project, one of the key projects is the top 10. So these are the top 10 most common application security risks. And it's absolutely important. And that's where I started learning about application security. And it's not the be all and end all, but it's a great place to start. And it's where I started. Now, if you're learning something, it's a really good way to tell if you understand it. And that's teaching other people. Clearly, where I was, no one else had security training either. So I started giving talks to developers, QA, functional testers, just about the top 10. It was a great way for me to help share my knowledge and just prove to myself that I knew a bit, I was learning about this stuff. Every time people asked, what tool should we use? The very first question. So I kind of, had another look. I thought, right, let's look at this properly. What tool can I recommend? And, I wanted it to be free, open source, cross-platform, easy to use, and maintained. And there was still nothing out there. Well, actually, there was. Because there was a version of Paris Proxy that I was hacking around with. I was maintaining it. So I decided to bite the bullet, and I released it. And I called it ZAP. And this is the email. I don't expect you to read it. On the old bug track list announcing it. And one of the key things is it was really intended for developers and functional testers. I said, okay, maybe experienced pen testers may find it useful, but it was always intended to be for developers and QA. That was the original idea. And also really, stressing there wouldn't be a pro version because I wanted to make sure it was as easy as possible for people to get involved and to contribute. So, where are we now? We have 3 project leaders. Myself, THC202, named Ricardo, who joined in 2011, and then King Thorin, a guy called Rick. So we've been leading the project for a long time now together. We have a core team which kind of changes over time. There have been one or two other members. A guy called Blackhat, who's now was a Google Summer of Code student, who's one of the core team. And it is very actively maintained. So we do average a couple of releases a year, but we do weekly releases, we do daily releases. It's got a plug-in architecture. We release add-ons all the time. I think on Monday we released another 4 updates. So yeah, it's very actively maintained. And we've got our own GitHub org, and there are 41 repositories in there. So it's quite a big project now. And if you look online, you'll see 37, but there's some private ones. That's what I looked this morning and thought, hey, 37, and then I remembered. So, and it is really, so ZAP we try to make it as easy as possible to actually use, and it's being used by a lot of commercial companies internally and part of the offerings that they give as well. And as I said, it's the world's most popular web application scanner, and it's one of the GitHub top 1,000 projects, which I was particularly pleased to hear. I got the email from GitHub, and there's a survey, and I thought, is this real? So I contacted them, and they went, yeah, you're on the top 1,000 projects, which I was very pleased with. So one thing with open source projects, it's really hard to actually get, to spend time, to find the time. The first 2 years I spent working on ZAP, all in my own time. My wife called herself a ZAP widow at some point at this time. Then I joined Mozilla, and between 40 and 80% of my time I could spend on ZAP, which is brilliant. But now I'm actually working for JIT. They're sponsoring my work on ZAP. So nearly 100% of my time is spent on ZAP thanks to JIT, which is brilliant. We've had Google Summer of Code students involved. They've implemented some absolutely key features. So if you're involved in open source and thinking about joining Google Summer of Code, I can strongly recommend it. We did a Mozilla Winter of Security with 3 students, a Google Season of Docs, competitions. And if any students, if anyone gets involved and gets in touch and say they'd like to get involved, the answer is yes. How can we help you? That's what we really want to do. So, little bit about running what's hopefully a successful open source project. One thing you've got to decide early on is, do you want to be a community-based project or have your own small focused team? I think, to be honest, if you've got a small focused team and ignore everyone else, that's the easy option. It's much easier to do. You can do whatever you want, and if you've got enough people, you'll do fine. That's not what we did. That's not what ZAP is about. I was looking for a community-based project that I could join and I could learn from. It didn't exist, so I created it. The whole idea of ZAP is to make it easy for people to get involved. And we've had developers get involved to learn about security, and we've had security people get involved to learn about development. So Rick King-Thorin, one of the project leads, was a security person who knew no development until he got involved in ZAP, and he's now one of the project leaders. So if you go down the community route, you do have to spend time with new contributors. It's always longer for somebody else to do the stuff who's new to the project than it is to do it yourself. But if it takes me an hour to help somebody do something that I would do in half an hour, I will always spend that hour working with them. It's so important. It's actually usually a lot longer than an hour to do half an hour's work that you would do. But people take time to understand, particularly once you've got a project as big and complex as ZAP, it takes time for people to understand it. And we try and spend as much time as we can with new contributors to help them get on board. And, if you go down the community route, you have to accept it's no longer your project. Early on, I never said ZAP was my project. It was always a community project. Just weren't any other contributors to start with. But they soon came on board, and it's a very important distinction and a way of thinking. And ZAP is definitely not my project now. In fact, I'm not even the most frequent contributor to ZAP, so that's Ricardo. But there's always too much to do, and there's never enough time. So you're always spinning plates. You're focusing on one thing, then another, then something else is important. There's a few things in the background which just turn around occasionally and tweak them, and they're fine. And then for some bizarre reason, you put another plate up and do something new. And then there's a crash behind you because you forgot to focus on something in the pieces. You've got to pick up the pieces and get that spinning again. So you've really got to keep on switching between things. And it's so easy to get distracted. You can focus, oh, shiny. So has anyone played around with ChatGPT. It's dangerous, isn't it? I thought, oh, this is such fun. There's loads of things I should be doing, but ooh. And it turns out ChatGPT actually can create Zap scripts. So we've got a scripting interface. It can script Zap from the outside and from the inside. It doesn't get the scripts quite right, but they're pretty close. But that's not a distraction, honest. Well, maybe a little one. Another thing you've got to focus on is documentation. If you don't document it, it does not exist. Particularly in the first few years of Zap, we had loads of people get in touch, raising issues or asking us questions saying, please implement this feature. And we'd often have to say, we already do that. Yep, we've done that already. The documentation. Where do we say we do it? Better write something quick. So, if you don't document it, people will not. I kind of assumed, particularly with security product, people would play around with it. They don't seem to. Or the ones who get in touch don't, So you really have to make it as easy as possible to people to find out what your project does and how to do it. And you need to be bloody minded, really. You need persistence, and you will get people criticizing you. You'll get people criticizing what you do, and at some level, you just have to ignore it and carry on doing your own thing. That's, really want to do that. So one thing you've got to do is, as an open source developer, you're the designer, you're the implementer, the tester. I mean, that goes without saying, really. You're also the technical author, which is challenging, but you need documentation. You're the graphical artist. I didn't draw all these pictures, by the way. We got a proper graphical artist to do that. But even so, you end up cobbling together things and hacking around with stuff. So you have to do these things. You have to do user support. You have to be the evangelist. You have to stand on stage. Well, you don't have to, but it helps. You have to be the project manager, the team leader, all of these things. So, and this is really, something. It'd be great if we had people volunteering to do these things, but inevitably they don't, or very rarely. So you do need to do so many things. Marketing as well. We don't have any sales because it's all free, but you have to do so much yourself, which is really interesting unless all you want to do is code. If you just want to code, then you can get involved in open source, but don't lead a project. It doesn't work that way. So getting contributors. This is really hard. If I had the answer to this, then I'll be very happy. We've always said that Zap's a community project. We want people to get involved. We encourage them to get involved. Originally, I really had hopes for security people. I thought we'd get loads of security people involved. They have got involved, but there is another commercial tool they tend to contribute to more, which is a shame, but that's the way it goes. I'd love more developers to get involved. Developers have absolutely key skills. I think, some do, but maybe they're nervous about contributing to a security tool. Don't be. It's a great way to learn about security, and you don't have to be a security expert to get involved. But we found that, in the end, students have been absolutely brilliant. We've had loads of really significant contributions, both from Google Summer of Code and from students getting in touch directly. I've got to do a project next term. Can I do it on Zap? The answer is yes. Now let's work out what you can do. So students have actually been really great. And one thing, what we've done is we've got a student hall of fame, and it was great fun putting this together and maintaining it, because it's just shown how many students who got into the industry, both development and security industry. And I basically said, if you get onto the Zap core team, I can get you job offers. I've got a list of companies who've told me, if you've got any good Zap developers, tell us, we'll employ them. I can't guarantee you'll accept the job offers you get, but I can get you job offers. No problem with that at all. One of the things you've got to be aware of is you don't know what's coming next. And this is very much true of a security project, but I think with all open source projects. But every day, workday, I will start off looking at Twitter and now Mastodon just to see if all hell has broken loose. And it often does. I mean, just over a year ago, we had Log4Shell. Everyone heard of Log4Shell? Anyone? Yeah, so vulnerability in Log4j. This was doubly interesting for Zap because we use Log4j. Zap was vulnerable. So, I mean, we had some mitigating controls. It wasn't too bad, but we had to get a new release out. Particularly as this is remotely, you can detect it remotely and exploit it remotely. But because we're a security project, we also wanted to create rules to detect Log4j, which we also did. So whatever I was doing at the time, Everything stopped, and I worked on that. That's not the one I'm going to concentrate on. One I'm thinking about was in 2016, I think. Woke up to a headline about a notorious hacker releasing a how-to video targeting police. Has anyone heard of Phineas Fisher? The OWASP guys again. Okay, so Phineas Fisher is a hacker or hacker collective, maybe. Yeah, it's not actually known. And they say they do ethical hacking, and they targeted the Catalan Police Department, the Police Federation, and they hacked into it, downloaded and published a load of private data. So this was interesting, particularly as they released a video explaining exactly how to do it and encouraging other people to do that. And in the video, it starts off with Niggers with Attitude track called F the Police. They go straight into Kali Linux, and then up comes OWASP ZAP. This is a screenshot from their video. And for the first 10 minutes, they're hacking into the Catalan website, Police Federation website with ZAP. That made my day interesting. I actually got a lot of heat and light from some OWASP leaders. It was not pretty at the time. We had some problems on the OWASP leaders list, and yeah, there was a lot of criticism. Why did we shouldn't allow this? We create open source security tools. Maybe they could be used for bad things as well. But, it was interesting. You should stop them. How? Put controls in. It's open source. They can take them out. You should check it's only security researchers doing this stuff. I don't know how many downloads we got a month then. We're getting 40,000 a month now. I'm not going to check those. So got a lot of grief from that. And actually, I was thinking, this is in the morning. My boss comes online in the afternoon. It's like, if there's bad news about something you work on, you tell your boss. Don't wait for someone else to. So contacting my boss, explain the situation. He was like, Simon, don't worry. But then, because of the same rule, he told his boss. His boss said, oh, nice one. But then he told his boss. And she said, oh, good publicity. And this is right near the top of Mozilla. So at that point, it's like, I'm okay. But it's still one of those things, you never know how these things are going to work out. The other thing is, you can get constructive feedback, or maybe not so constructive. Just last week, I saw this thing on Twitter, basically saying, don't know if you can read it there, yeah, just completed ZAP HUD tutorial, do not recommend, it's bugged as hell. So what's wrong with this? Actually, I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm not okay in that, there's clearly problems here, but, I'd much rather they came to us telling us about it. But if that's the case, I don't have a problem. But what I do, I always reach out to people and find out if I can actually help. And 9 times out of 10, it's actually people go, oh, well, and they explain the situation, you go through it, and you actually get people on side. And you find problems, you solve them, and people are good about that. Not this time. I got in touch and they're saying, what problems do you encounter? Lots of things, but the most troublesome is the one where you ask me for feedback, which you're not going to get because the problems I encountered should have been caught by basic application tests. Well, strictly speaking, yes, the test should have covered those. They did actually cover them. Trouble is, browsers changed, things got broken, the tests were broken. Our bad, but I mean, this is not the way to interact. Well, I don't think it's a good way to interact with open source projects. It's just a good example, and fair's fair. I did explain that, I did go and check it out. There is a problem. We're looking at it, and it was only fair to let them know that I'm going to use it as an example here. It's just too good an opportunity to miss. And I complained about it on Twitter, but just to get, just when you think Twitter's, just getting worse and worse, then you get responses like this. Someone saying, use ZAP, and it's been great so far. Don't give up, So you get some really nice interactions with Twitter as well. So I don't want to focus on the bad side. It's just, you get some arseholes out there. So ongoing challenges. I mean, there's loads of them. Time. Spending enough time is really hard. Direct sponsorship is absolutely key if you can do it. Obviously, got that from JIT now, which is brilliant, but it's hard to get. Getting more long-term contributors, I'd love to find a good way of doing that. It's really hard, but if you want to get involved, just let me know. Getting actionable feedback, because it's an open source project, people aren't paying you money. they don't have the same expectations, and they're not so willing to share all the problems and all the details, which always makes things challenging. And you've got to look at emails, issues, Slack, groups, Twitter, Mastodon, Stack Overflow. There's a million ways that people report problems to you directly or indirectly, and it's hard to keep on top of those things. And how do you choose what the right thing to do at any one time? There's so many things you should be doing, and it's really hard to know what you're doing is right, or what you should be doing something else. It's tough. So what's changed the last 12 years? Well, open source just carried on growing and growing, which is really great. I'm obviously a fan of open source, and it's great to see more people getting involved. From my point of view, there actually is increased security awareness, or maybe not based on the show of hands from before, but I think it is getting better. And the whole DevOps, DevSecOps movements, I think, has really helped, because it's helped developers realize that it's not stuff in isolation. They've got to realize how their software is being used, where it's being used, the environment it's in, which includes the security environment. Bug bounties, that's a big change from the security point of view. I've been involved in the Mozilla bug bounty, and we've got a bug bounty on Zap. So if you find a vulnerability, if it's remote code execution, we'll pay you for that. And so DAST is Dynamic Application Security Testing Tools, which is Zap is. We've seen a lot of them come and go. I've got a GitHub repo where I track them, and one will come along and then it'll die after a while. So at least how it goes. But actually, over the last 12 years, I think one of the biggest changes I've seen is GitHub. It has made a massive difference. Actually released Zap on SourceForge originally, then moved to Google Code. But GitHub has made things significantly easier. With SourceForge, we actually had to give people full write access, to contribute, which caused a lot of problems. People just checking rubbish and things. So the whole GitHub has really made it contributing to open source significantly easier. Obviously, there are also other alternatives now, but GitHub's been leading the way in that, which I think is massive, really. So, few conclusions for you. Just wrap up in time, hopefully. I actually think luck plays a big part. I think I was lucky to want to get in, have a need for an application security testing tool. There wasn't one out there, and the one I created ended up being very popular. Your open source project is not just for Christmas or for Hanukkah. If you want it to keep on growing, you've got to just keep on working at it. There's no way around that. But it's actually, you get many open doors. I've talked on many continents and met many great people, some industry leaders. It's actually been brilliant for me. I really enjoy it. I thoroughly recommend it. But just get involved. It's really great to get involved in open source, and really changes your profile. I was an unknown developer. I've done some good work, I think, of companies, but nobody knew me outside the companies I worked for, and now I'm known a bit more. And do not be afraid to start a new open source project. If there's an existing one, I think it's better to contribute, if it's along the lines you're thinking of, but don't be afraid to start. But yeah, be aware it can turn into a very long-term commitment. And the main thing is just keep plugging away. I think one of the reasons Zap has been so successful is that the core team, the project leaders, we just keep going. It's not about coming up with some great feature and all of a sudden everything is wonderful and everyone starts using you. We just had a slow grow of people using the product more and more, and we just carry on adding new features, trying to make things better, trying to make it more stable, new ways of using it. It just takes time, so just keep plugging away rather than expecting instant success. It looks like I've got 2 minutes left according to the counter. And yeah, if you want to learn any more about Zap, that is the website. And any questions or comments? Stunned silence there. Three key ways of a successful DAST strategy. For any would be a good start, wouldn't it? The main thing is, so if you haven't done any security testing at all, DAST is the place to start, because this is the attacker's view of your application. If your application is online, it will be attacked. And the best way to find out what could happen, what could go wrong, is to use a tool like Zap. You can use it manually. We've got loads of ways to automate it. One of the problems is applications are weird. So we try and configure Zap so it handles most things out of the box, but really if you do anything unusual, you probably need to tune it. We're trying to make it easier to do that automatically, but it's really hard. But yeah, using Zap manually to start with, just to get an idea to see how it actually copes with your application. But then you can actually export the configuration from the Zap desktop, and you can automate that. And there's a whole load of companies and open source projects that are built on top of Zap, and we list them all on that website under third-party products and services. Any more last questions? Ooh, good question. Certainly not. Why I chose OWASP was, why did I choose to make Zap part of OWASP, and would I recommend it? And for me, it was, I found the OWASP site and the OWASP projects really useful. It was absolutely key for me to understand this stuff. I just thought it was a good place for Zap to live. I thought it would be a good way to get publicity, and it'd be a good way to get more interaction with the community. I didn't actually expect OWASP to accept it because I knew it had WebScarab. I didn't know at the time that WebScarab had been abandoned. But OWASP is very welcoming for new projects. I know that because I'm on the OWASP Project Committee. So surprisingly, I would also recommend joining OWASP both as an individual member if you want to learn about security, but also projects. It is a great place to be because we can be very supportive, and you get a lot of interactions with other project leaders, so you can understand how your project fits in and get a lot of advice and guidance. And we're always very welcome to, we try and support projects as much as possible. Thank you for the planted question. I didn't know you were going to ask it, but I should have guessed. I think we're at time, so unless anyone's got any last-minute urgent questions, I will say thank you very much.